All right, welcome everyone. Let's just jump right in with a big question. Have you ever stopped and wondered if the world you see, the world all around you, is the real world? It sounds a bit crazy, but that's the exact question that sits at the very heart of German idealism. Now, this was one of the most influential, most ambitious movements in all of Western philosophy. So today we're going to unpack where it came from, who the key thinkers were, and maybe most importantly for us, why it's so critical for our understanding of Christian thought and our ministry today.
So, what if reality isn't out there, but in here? I mean, this question really does get to the core of it all. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just some abstract thought experiment for them. No way. This was the radical starting point, the premise, that a whole generation of brilliant thinkers used to solve a massive philosophical crisis that was left over from the Enlightenment. Okay, so to really get why idealism even became a thing, we have to rewind a little bit. We've got to go back to the giant of the Enlightenment himself, Immanuel Kant. Now, Kant, he had this huge project. He wanted to figure out the absolute limits of human reason. What can we know for sure? But in trying to answer that, well, he accidentally created a puzzle, a problem, that seemed completely unsolvable. So here's what he did. Kant basically split reality right down the middle. On one side, you have what he called the phenomenal world. This is everything we experience, right? Everything you can see, touch, and process with your mind. He said, yep, this world, this is knowable. But then there's the other side. He called it the noumenal world. And that's the world as it truly is in and of itself. And here's the kicker. Kant's big conclusion was that we can never know it. Never. It's just forever beyond our reach. So he leaves us with this huge, frustrating gap, this unbridgeable chasm between us and ultimate reality. And that leads us perfectly to this quote from G.W.F. Hegel, who comes a bit later. He said, dichotomy is the source of the need for philosophy. He just nails the feeling of the time. The philosophers who came after Kant, they just couldn't live with this. They couldn't accept this great divide. So this problem, this dichotomy, it became the central obsession they had to solve. They felt like they absolutely had to find a way to heal this split and put reality back together again. Right, so how on earth do you solve a puzzle that the great Kant himself basically called unsolvable? Well, the idealist. They came up with an answer that was, honestly, it was breathtaking in its audacity. They looked at the gap Kant created, and instead of trying to build a bridge across it, they just decided, you know what? Let's just erase the gap altogether. Their big idea was this. What if that external world, what Kant called the noumenal world, isn't actually separate from us in the first place? What if all of reality is ultimately the product of a mind, of some kind of spiritual agency? They argued that the universe out there and the universe in here, they're ultimately one and the same. The knower and the thing that is known are part of the same single reality. Okay, now this is a really, really important point. They weren't saying that you create your reality and I create mine. That idea is called solipsism, and it's a dead end they were desperately trying to avoid. Instead, what they proposed was a universal, supra-individual mind, meaning a mind that's above and beyond any single one of us. They called it the absolute. And this absolute mind is the single source of all reality, all through its own creative thought. So that's the big idea. But how did it actually take shape? Well, let's look at the first two major thinkers who really grabbed this concept and ran with it. A guy named Johann Gottlieb Fichte and then Friedrich Schelling. They took the problem Kant gave them and this new idealist answer and started building a whole new way of seeing the world. All right, so Fichte, he started with the I, with the self. He said, look, consciousness kicks off the moment the self just asserts its own existence. I am. But then he asked, what's the point? For the self to be truly free, it needs something to push against, right? Something to strive for. So the I actually creates a non-I, that's the objective world out there, as a whole sphere of opposition, of obstacles. Why? So that we have a place to exercise our freedom and our moral will.
And this is where it gets really fascinating, you know? For Fichte, the world isn't just a bunch of random stuff, of neutral facts. No, the whole world, the universe, is the object and sphere of our duties. He completely fuses our experience with our moral purpose. In his view, the very structure of the universe is moral. It's absolutely nothing more than the arena for our duty. Well, Schelling, who worked with Fichte, he looked at this and thought, that's a bit cold, a bit narrow. Schelling had much more of a romantic spirit. He didn't see nature as just some kind of moral gym, an obstacle course for the ego.
For Schelling, nature was alive. It was a vital, creative, breathing organism. It was a beautiful expression of the absolute, a kind of visible spirit moving in perfect harmony with the invisible spirit toward this ultimate, grand unity. And that brings us to the real giant of this movement, the climax. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. If Fichte and Schelling laid the groundwork, Hegel came along and built a skyscraper. He created this vast, all-encompassing system that was designed to explain literally everything. We're talking history, art, religion, politics, the whole shebang. And this right here is probably his most famous and maybe most misunderstood quote. The rational is the real, and the real is the rational. So what does he mean by that? For Hegel, it's simple. There is no gap between reason and reality. None. Because reality itself, history, the entire story of the universe, is just the logical, rational unfolding of the absolute mind, what he called Geist, the German word for spirit. So how does it all unfold? What's the engine driving this whole process? Well, for Hegel, it's the famous dialectic. It's a three-step dance. You start with a thesis, any idea or way society's structured. But that thesis will always contain a contradiction, and that gives rise to its opposite, the antithesis. Now, these two clash, and out of that struggle, you don't just get a winner and a loser. You get a synthesis, a new, higher level of truth that cancels out the old conflict, but also preserves the best parts of both sides. And then, that synthesis becomes the new thesis, and the whole process starts over again, pushing history and thought ever upward. And what's so interesting is that this way of thinking, this idea that opposites actually create and define each other, it's not totally unique to Hegel. You can find echoes of it in a completely different tradition, like in the Tao Te Ching. Being and non-being create each other. It just goes to show you this deep intuition that everything is interconnected, that you can't have one side without the other. It seems to be a very human insight, and it's right at the heart of what the idealists were trying to do. Okay, so we've been deep in the weeds of some pretty abstract 19th century German philosophy. It's easy to ask, why does any of this matter to me as I'm preparing for ministry here in Nigeria today? And that is the right question to ask. So let's bring it all home. Let's look at the huge impact that idealism has had and continues to have on Christian thought and on the very world that we are called to minister in. Just take a look at this table. The contrast is, well, it's stark. The idealist framework doesn't just tweak Christian doctrine, it radically redefines it. Where we, from an evangelical perspective, talk about a personal, transcendent God who is distinct from his creation, they talk about an absolute spirit that is immanent in or unfolding within the world. Where we talk about Christ as the unique, once-for-all incarnation, they see it as part of an eternal process of God becoming manifest. Scripture for us is final authoritative revelation. For them, it's a provisional, even mythic expression of humanity's growing divine awareness. And salvation? It shifts from an individual's redemption through faith to a progressive, collective salvation of humanity as a whole. This is a profound and direct challenge to an orthodox biblical framework. And make no mistake, its influence is everywhere, even today. Think about it. The very idea that we study things by looking at their historical development, that's pure Hegel. The emphasis on community or the state being more important than the individual, that idea was foundational for Marxism and other movements. And what about the very common spiritual idea today? The idea of a God who is in everything? That's a direct descendant of idealist pantheism. So understanding this stuff, it helps us diagnose the philosophical air that the people we will minister to are breathing every single day. So there you have it. We've seen how German idealism rose up to try and heal that great divide that Kant left in reality. And we've seen how its ideas, for better or worse, are still deeply embedded in our world. So as you go from here, as you engage with the culture around you, I want to leave you with this question to really think about. Where do you see the echoes of this idea of an absolute spirit moving through history? And how does that powerful and frankly very compelling idea, how does it challenge or maybe even help you sharpen your own view of the personal, sovereign, transcendent God of the Bible? That, I think, is the crucial question for us to take away.